You're listening to Travel Tales with Fergal.
Hello, my name is Fergal O'Keefe and you're very welcome to the podcast. I have a very special guest today, John Connell, who is the acclaimed bestselling author who has written a trilogy of autobiographical books which have been described as love letters to his home county of Longford. John published the best-selling The Cow Book in 2008, which is a memoir of his return to his family's farm in Longford after many years in Australia. Then he wrote the running book about his love of running, but also the rich colonial history of Longford. John has just released a new book called The Stream of Everything, which is about a 2-day canoe trip down the Camlin River in Longford with a friend of his. The stunning book is a meditation on the simple beauty of nature, but also a celebration of the slow pace of rural life, especially in counties like Longford. I really loved doing this interview with John, and I think his love of his home county really shone through in the interview. So Longford is part of the Hidden Heartland brand, and for more information on Longford, what makes the county so special, please go to longford.ie website. So John, you're very welcome to the podcast. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Fergal, and thanks for having me on.
I started this podcast when, during the COVID times, I started walking down by the river shore every day, and it got me to appreciate the river and the flora and the fauna, and it actually got me to appreciate my local area, and it got me to thinking about travel. So when this book was coming out, I was really looking forward to it. It was exactly the sort of thing that I was thinking about during the COVID times, the stream of everything, and it lived up to what I was hoping it would be. It's spectacular. So well done on that. Congratulations, first of all.
Thanks very much. So nice of you to say.
So it's a real, I'd say, like a real celebration of the locals. So what gave you the idea?
Well, it's a story that goes back about 10 years. I was on Sydney Harbour kayaking, which I used to do, and I nearly got hit by a big ferry passenger boat. And I made a promise to myself that I'd return to the Camlin River, the little river that I knew as a boy, and make a journey down it if I got out of the situation. And then promptly forgot about my promise. I had actually been at the start of 2020 in America documenting migrant farm worker rights. And I had returned to Ireland, and, you know, the pandemic hit, and I realized that I was in Ireland and I wasn't going to be able to, the next place I was supposed to go to was Brazil, so I wouldn't have been able to do that. And so I remembered the idea of the Camlin and suggested it to my father, who said, I think that's a good idea. And then my friend Peter was home, and I invited him to come on the journey with me. And you know, Fergal, I'm someone who's, as we'll probably hear, has traveled all over the world, but this was one of the best trips I've ever had. You know, and it was right on our doorstep. And if it hadn't been for COVID, I probably never would have made it.
Exactly. And we did the Camino together, and I remember you were talking about the book. It was before it came out, you know, and you sounded surprised with yourself. You were even saying it was one of the best things that you ever did.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt, one of the best ever. It was, it was just so, you know, you think you know your home, and then you go on a little trip through it in a different way, and you realize that there's so much going on. And, you know, I wrote a few articles when the book was released about rivers being the last wildernesses in Ireland. And really, in a sense, they are, because, you know, people don't really go to the rivers that much, bar fishing or whatever. So I remember going on the canoe and seeing fish in the water, and then seeing kingfishers and herons fishing. And I just thought, this is a whole little universe I have never really given my full attention to.
By being, you know, talk about it in the book, about sort of a different pace of life on the river. You're moving at a different pace, so you see everything at a different pace, don't you?
Yeah, we were going, I think, at about 2 miles an hour, so maybe 3.
On a good day.
On a good day. So everything slows down. And I remember Peter saying to me, he said, you know, an hour feels like 10 minutes, and then at other times 10 minutes feels like an hour. And you're at a different pace, and you have to slow down, and you have to go at the river's length. And, you know, the river's only 30 odd miles long, but it took 2 whole days to get from start to finish. And it was transformative, really, you know. Slowing down was exactly the thing that I needed to do at that time. But I think in so many ways, we were all being asked to slow down when the pandemic hit. And in slowing, some of us had the opportunity, if we weren't, if we had, so I'm aware some people didn't, because obviously there was people working on the front lines through it all, but some of us got opportunities to look at the world in maybe a different pace and realize that there were things here all along that we hadn't really appreciated.
And your three books, so it's the Longford trilogy, the running book, the cow book, and now the stream of everything. When you originally started with the cow book, did you think it was going to be a trilogy, or did it just happen?
No, it just happened. I did an interview with the Irish Times, and I was talking about Brian Friel, who wrote, he said he wrote an accidental quartet on the nature of love. And in a sense, I wrote an accidental trilogy on the nature of Longford. But I suppose I was writing those books to understand myself, Fergal, and the journey that I'd been on from Australia and Canada back to Ireland. And it took three books to put that into perspective. And, life kind of conspired in such a way that I ended up writing those three books, about three memoirs about my life. And it had never been an intention to do that. But when I look back on it now, it's allowed me to exercise a lot of ghosts and to face into the next projects with a clear mind, But it was a wonderful thing to do. And, Longford has a rich literary heritage, but I've added to it now with three books. And I like to think about the great Blasket Island writers who wrote about the times they lived in. And in a sense, those three books are a postcard from, the early 21st century in Ireland, in rural Ireland.
Exactly. And I would call it it's like a love letter to Longford. Your love of the county and its people and its history is the theme that runs through the three books.
Yeah, no, it does. I grew up here. I left when I was 18, didn't come back till I was 29. And I suppose when I came back, I'm 7 years at home now. I had to rediscover my home. And I did that in a grand sense with Ireland too. There was a lot of things I hadn't done. I hadn't been to the Cliffs of Moher. I hadn't climbed Croagh Patrick. But similarly, I hadn't been to Loughree in Longford, or I hadn't walked along the canal from Clondra up to Dublin, things like that. So I began to fill myself up with the stories of this place and realized that there was a universal, John McGarn used to say that the local was the universal. And I think in a sense, I could see the universality in life here as to life in other places.
You talked there about Australia. So when you were growing up in Longford then, was your plan to leave?
Well, not necessarily. I wanted to get out, I suppose, and see the world. But it all happened by chance. I was studying in Dublin, and I had picked the course in journalism because there was a semester abroad. And it's a strange thing that my fate was sealed and I wasn't even there. My name was picked out of a hat to go to Australia on semester abroad, and I wasn't there that day, and found out the next day or whatever it was. And that one little moment decided the rest of my life, in a sense. I went to Australia for 6 months. I got a scholarship to return to finish my studies there, made a documentary about human rights abuses of Aboriginal Australians, and before I knew it, 6 years had went by in Australia. So my life I was in Australia. I'm a permanent resident of Australia. My whole life was determined by that one thing. And life was good in Australia, and I was doing good work as a documentary maker and a journalist. So I hadn't thought about coming back because things were going so well. A random act, like my name could easily have been pulled out of to go to London or to go to America, and maybe I wouldn't have had the experience I did and would have come back after the 6 months and stayed in Ireland. But as it was, one thing led to another, and the years quickly went by, and I was just working all the time.
When you're in Australia, were you thinking about Ireland? Like when you're abroad, did it make you miss Longford?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I used to think about home initially at the start, especially. and I was homesick, and I wrote my first short story, which got me my first book deal, and it was about a cow and a calf, and so I was thinking about it, and then gradually, I suppose, I made an active choice when I moved overseas to integrate and like get to know people. So I didn't want to hang around in just with expats or Irish migrants. I wanted to get to know Australians, and I think in doing that, it allowed me to build a friendship base so that I didn't feel so alone or homesick. And I remember, walking down Oxford Street on one of my first nights there, and I had been quite a shy person before that, and I said, if I don't put myself out there, this is going to be a miserable 6 months. So if I put myself out there, this could be interesting. And I suppose I had a little transformation of the self that night, and I realized that you get out what you put in.
That often happens when you go abroad, isn't it? That it opens you up. That's that's the good thing for Irish people when they go away. It often releases their personality in a way.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good way of putting it, Fergal. I think that's what it did for me.
You moved back 7 years. You went in Australia. You went to Canada then, didn't you? And
I did. I went to Canada for 2 years, chasing love, and it ultimately didn't work out. But I was directing a TV series over there, and came back to Ireland, and I suppose it's no secret I'd had a few mental health problems, and had to kind of deal with them. And I went to Australia in 2015 to launch my first book. There, I suppose the idea of trying to be a writer, a professional writer, came upon me, and I returned home to Ireland and decided to try and write my book, my great book, and to try and make it as a writer. And if it didn't work, I would have went back to journalism and worked as a producer. I probably would have moved over. I probably would have moved to Australia or America or something. But I was back home working on the farm, and from that lay the seeds of the cow book, which radically changed my life and has rooted me here in Longford.
And that book, so that sold all over the world. It was a great hit, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was all over the world, sold tens of thousands of copies. I was the most surprised of anyone. I had dreamed about this stuff happening, and then when it did, it doesn't seem real, but it allowed me to pursue the dream that I'd wanted to pursue for a few years, which was to be a writer. And I was so happy it spent 6 months in the bestsellers list here in Ireland, and every week was this amazing, astounding feat that it was still selling, and I think as well it was a celebration of rural life and farming life, obviously, but it was a story that hadn't really been told in Ireland in a long time, and we have such a rich agrarian background, and people are never far from the land in Ireland, and I think it just resonated with people. And from that, then I got to write the running book, which was about my great passion in life of running. And that was a literary gamble in a sense, but I wanted to do it because it was something that I really believed in. And I had wrote that. I was living in America at the time, and I wrote that, and it was a really wonderful project to be allowed to do that and have it released all around the world as well. So it's been an interesting few years. The
running book, I absolutely love it as well. You're talking about running and the, various characters, but really it's about Longford, and you're running through places and you're giving the history. And again, it shows me what I love about that idea, like you're local and you're going through, and there's so much history in Ireland, isn't there, in every county, but in Longford, the history there is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's. I was in LA writing that book, and I realized I'd done the run, and I had my research books with me, and I realized that this was probably a good opportunity to be able to tell some of these stories. And I was talking to a filmmaker the weekend, and I was just saying how I was lucky to be able to tell these stories on an international stage, because it might affect somebody or touch them in some way that they could connect. And Longford is a small place, but it has been a pivotal place in Irish history, from the Elizabethan conquest, where it was the edge of the Elizabethan Empire, to 1798, and the rebellion ended in Longford, to the War of Independence and Sean McKeown and Michael Collins and all that. So I had this opportunity to talk about that history in that book, and I was proud of it. I was proud of that story, because it wasn't known, and people really did connect with it. And the running book came out in the first year of the pandemic, and I suppose movement had taken on such a big meaning for people. We had the 5K, radius, and so running was something that people took up, and it allowed them to maybe, I hope, understand their parish or their townland in a new way.
Exactly, because that's every county has that. Like there's little castles or old mounds that are connected to history that we go past every day and we don't even notice. I always notice that on the shore, like the history, as you're walking along, you're going through centuries and centuries of history. That's what that book really showed.
There's so much. I mean, we have so much history in Ireland, and it is really special. And it's a history of conflict too, and colonization. And
Exactly.
the book was about colonization as well, but or colonialism. But it goes back so far. I mean, I even talked about it in the stream of everything, about the nature of there being, standing stones which are older than the pyramids in Ireland. And sometimes I've often told people about Newgrange, and how it's older than the pyramids, and people have never heard of it from overseas. So we do have this wonderful stuff here that people maybe don't know enough about, or are not proud enough of it to say that actually this is ours, and take ownership of it, and say, we have had a long civilization here, and it has a global impact.
And it's so important to keep that history alive. And that's why I really liked seeing that in the books. Like even, in the stream of everything, you're talking about the Vikings and coming, having a base in Loughree and going up the river, and it really brought it alive, I thought.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, yeah. Turgis, the Viking. I mean, he had supposedly 100 ships on Loughree, which is unbelievable. I mean, Loughree is huge, but that's unbelievable. But and I didn't know that story till I started researching the book. And the Viking past of Ireland is fascinating, because the first cities were Viking cities: Waterford, Wexford, Dublin. So we do have a Viking past here, and I didn't know about it. There was a lake here which I knew, the Lough Gowna, which the Vikings had sailed up and ransacked a monastery, but I didn't know much about the rest of their imprint on the place. But to think that there was a Viking king who had not only had 100 ships on Loughree, he also had destroyed Clonmacnoise and set up his wife as a sage on the abbey. So it's a very interesting part of our history, and I suppose my barometer was, if I found it interesting, I thought other people might find it interesting too.
For the last few weeks, I've been doing a couple of articles about, when you're abroad, to go off the beaten track, not to go to the the regular spots, because they're more expensive and harder to get accommodation, etc. And within Ireland, it's the same thing. So Longford, as a destination, it is off their traditional route, but because of that, not beside it, that's what makes it such a special place, I would say.
Yeah, like I think we're trying to, we're part of the Hidden Heartlands campaign, and the Midlands counties are trying to entice people to come. And I think, I was saying this to someone the other day, like the beauty of the Midlands is we don't have that many tourists. So when someone does arrive, they get a very big welcome, because we love meeting people from overseas or from other parts of Ireland who've come here. And then in the Midlands, we are blessed with water. There's lakes everywhere, from Cavan all the way to Westmeath and Longford. There's lakes all over, and the Shannon flowing through the Midlands as well. And there's something quite special about being in a quiet place, because you can take it in. And I do run into more and more people coming here, and I find that they really appreciate being able to go to a lake or go fishing and not being disturbed by anyone else. So if you wanted a quiet time, it is a great place to come. But also because the locals are so friendly and opening to tourists, they want to see people, and they want to welcome them and have a chat. And I think like my wife is from Australia, and she always talks about how welcoming the Longford people and Midlands people have been to her. So I suppose that's a good barometer.
Exactly. And I think a line you said, a quiet walk on the road became a thing of wonder. And that's what the book, I think, shows as well, is that being in silence and then hearing the sounds, etc., that you don't normally notice in daily life.
Yeah, I remember when COVID first came, and I would walk near our cottage, and I remember listening to bees flying around wildflowers on a road. And I said, the bees were always here. I just hadn't had the time to listen to them before. And it was such a lovely little moment, and a moment of appreciation that nature was continuing on. And, I say that in the book, everything has stopped except the flow of the rivers and the lap of the seas. And nature continued on without us, and in fact thrived without us in that period of global stoppage. And it asks nothing of us, only to respect it.
Something that we've talked about before on the Camino, and you mentioned about it in the book, is a rural manifesto. And I love that idea of the rural manifesto for places like Longford, because it's important to keep these places alive and keep them growing. And things like tourism, I think, is great for potential for those counties, isn't it?
Yeah, the rural manifesto came about in Castilla y Leon, and going through the Mesetas, which is you were with me, but through a very the region of empty Spain, as they call it. And traveling through Ireland, as I have done over the last few years since coming back, there are places that are suffering with rural depopulation, or maybe lack of industry. And we have a responsibility as our generation to protect those little villages and those little towns, to provide a future for them. And the future is that young people will ultimately want to stay and not move to an urban city. And, I think COVID, in a sense, provided, for the first time ever, really, an opportunity to come back, work remotely, and make a better town or village. And I seen it in Longford. We had a new coffee shop open, and two young guys who had come from working in Dublin and brought with them their whole barista skills, and gave a flavour of the cosmopolitan. And there are so many people who only want the best for these rural places, and tourism is so. I'm thinking of, like, there's a small little town in Longford, Lanesborough, a lovely place, and there's a whiskey distillery has opened there. And things like that will attract people. It's on the Shannon, so people can come off their boat, go and buy a bottle of whiskey, get a tour of the brewery or distillery. Things like that are the future for small villages and towns. And Longford is doing okay, and it's because people want to live there, and make it a better place. And I suppose I'm a writer who lives in rural Ireland, and rural Ireland allows me to live in where I am and do my job as a writer. So I'm very privileged, because there's an appreciation of the written word here, and I don't have to be in Dublin, which is a wonderful thing.
The other thing that I liked about the books, and particularly your newest one, is, you talk about spirituality. It comes through in your writing, and I like that you're open about it, and that isn't something that you always see now in modern writing in Ireland.
Faith is important to me, and I think we're spiritual beings. I think we need to have some form of spirituality in our lives, and it helps ground us and helps connect us. And I think that my faith journey has deepened in the time that from 29 to now, when I came back. I wouldn't have been that spiritual of a person before. It really grew in me, and it helps give me a center in my world, but also understand the world. And it's I think man is inherently. I was watching a documentary the other day about early humans, and they were saying that we we had a spiritual belief system, and it allowed us to imagine the world. And I think, yes, you're right, it's not talked about as much now, but I look at writers like John O'Donoghue from Clare, or Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, and I feel a connection with them, and their writings make sense to me. And increasingly I've become interested in ecological theology, which is about seeing the creator spirit in nature. And maybe it's from being a farmer and working on the farm, but seeing new life come into the world and feeling the sense of creation all around one. And for that, I have no other word but God. So yeah, that's me anyway.
If you were to give Longford a personality, what would you say its personality is?
Oh, I'd say it's very friendly, friendly and welcoming, and likes a laugh. I was out at the weekend and met some people who had read my books, and I didn't know them, but immediately there was camaraderie and chat, and it was kind of there's a great curiosity in Longford. I think because people don't come here too often, there's a great curiosity about where you're from and wanting to get to know you. I think one of the big tourism draws here is the lakes for fishermen and stuff. And I've met fishermen through the years, be they German or English, and they always say they love the pace of the people around here. That we're open. And I think that's probably the best word to describe Longford people. They're open to having the crack, having a chat, and wanting to know your story. So that would be my curiosity about the people, I suppose.
And something I didn't really think about until you said it was that Longford was the most western point on the British Empire. When it was within the Pale, it was the most western point. Yeah. And it's really interesting, that it's the last outpost.
Yes, it was a crossroads for, it's been a crossroads a lot of time through history. So yes, the Elizabethan Empire, when England was building its, the origins of the British Empire, Longford was as far as control went, and they were in power struggles with the O'Farrell Gaelic chieftains, and past that was Connacht and the wild kingdoms of the Gael. But then you move forward, and as I mentioned earlier, like 1798, the rebellion ends in Longford. The War of Independence has a huge. There's a big movement of the War of Independence in Longford, in the Midlands. There's a lot of ambushes and battles and skirmishes take place here. And then you move forward into the modern era with Albert Reynolds, the former Prime Minister, Taoiseach, being from Longford Westmeath. So it's been a little pivotal point of change in Ireland for a very long time, and it's something that I didn't fully realize until I started to research it myself and appreciate how special the Lakelands region is.
And my last question, it's a tricky one, is would there be one spot, like if tourists were coming, that you'd recommend as a must-see?
Oh, yes, I would. Lough Gowna in North Longford. It's a huge lake that straddles between Longford and Cavan. One side is Longford, one side is Cavan. It's got an ancient monastery on it, which the Vikings raided. It's got a forest, which you can go walking in. And I used to live there, and I've always loved it. I've swam in it and fished in it and boated on it. It's a beautiful place. It's very big, and so one can really get lost in it in a good way. And I suppose it showcases the best of what this region, this Lakelands region, has to offer. In that you can go out on your boat and get away and maybe only see 2 or 3 other people all day. So you have a real sense of getting away from it all, and that's right here, ready to be explored. And there's no price other than the petrol to get down to Longford.
Thank you so much. And your book, as I said, is the stream of everything, and I'd really recommend it. Well done. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Fergal. All right. Cheers, Fergal. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John, for a great interview. I have to say that Longford is a very special part of Ireland. I'm lucky enough to have friends who have a lake house in Loughree near Lanesborough, and Chris, who's originally from New Zealand, would always say that the best sunsets in the world are over that lake in Longford. In fact, Chris and Judith searched all over Ireland for a lake house, and they chose Loughree because it reminded them of the famous Marlborough Sound region in New Zealand. It truly is a beautiful part of Ireland waiting to be discovered by many Irish people. Longford recently made national attention in the tourism sector when Centre Park set up one of Ireland's largest tourist attractions. It's got over 100 activities on offer for up to 2,500 guests in luxurious lodges on site at Newcastle Woods. But there are also more attractions and activities in the county for tourists, including the Royal Canal Greenway from Clondra to Dublin, which is the longest linear greenway in Ireland. There is also the National Famine Way from Strokestown, which is a great trail for walkers. For history buffs, there's the Corley Trackway Visitor Centre in Kenna, which is home to the ancient Iron Age bog road, which dates all the way back to 148 BC. Then there's also the Knights and Conquest Heritage Centre in Granard, which is a Norman Ireland interactive visitor centre adjacent to Ireland's tallest motte. So for more information on all the sites and activities in Longford, please go to their website longford.ie. I look forward to sharing more travel tales with you in the coming weeks. Take care and safe travels.